Good evening, welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and the National Quarterly Labour Survey coming out this week and showing pre-COVID we were already in trouble. Anecdotally, the numbers are getting considerably worse, and we are seeing the potential for millions of job losses in an already fraught economy. Three specialists up for you this evening to give us a realistic picture of South Africa's employment prospects. Tashmia Ismail-Saville, who is Chief Executive of the Youth Employment Service. We'll talk to Nomkhita Nqweni. She is from the Solidarity Fund, where she's Chief Executive, and Kevin Lings, who is the Chief Economist at Stanlib. Our first guest this evening on Taking Stock is Tashmia Ismail-Saville. She's Chief Executive of the YES campaign, the Youth Employment Service, announced by the President nearly 3 years ago now, in the hope that she'd be able to miraculously create 1 million jobs. That was never going to happen, but is made considerably more difficult by COVID-19 and the lockdowns. What has the impact been, Tashmia?
We've been incredibly fortunate at YES that most of the companies that had taken youth on pre-crisis had committed to continue paying them. And so our existing contracts, there's 35,411 jobs created by YES, these one-year work experiences, putting 1.4 billion in salaries back into the economy. It's a substantial number. And almost all of these, barring 266 jobs, those youth are still working. YES youth get placed with a smartphone in market, and that smartphone has these zero-rated apps. So we're able to communicate with youth on a daily basis. We train them, digitally train them, but we're also pulling data. And we put a COVID survey out, and Bruce, what is quite startling is that 70% of our youth earning these YES salaries across the country have said that with lockdown, they've been supporting additional household members. So that income in households suddenly got a lot more important. What's also encouraging, we had a tough April. I think everybody was just reeling from how are we going to deal with this. But encouragingly, in May, we've had 32 new company registrations of companies committing to take youth on. So there is an on button that is definitely being switched, and we're still seeing activity. There are, however, real repercussions for youth in the unskilled, semi-skilled space. If we look at those sectors which were really great at absorbing semi-skilled youth, tourism and hospitality, they really have been wiped out. And if you look at our YES companies that have contacted us to say force majeure or trading difficulties, almost exclusively they've come from that sector. So we are very concerned. Those salaries matter. These are young parents, this 18 to 35 age. And these are people who are going to be very impacted. I know ABSA has said 1 million job losses. In the youth sector, where we already had youth unemployment at 55–60%, I fear that there's a lot of informal job loss that's also going to be happening there that's going to make this a lot worse than the official figures are showing.
Tashmia, and the real lived experience of people who are suffering before this COVID-19 crisis is so tangible. I mean, you see this on a daily basis. You've got your programs that you keep running. You've got a great face mask project at the moment, which has got its first export contract to Belgium. But these are really small in the ocean of need. And this is a crisis that requires a fundamental rethink in terms of not only job losses, but how do we create economic opportunities for young people in an economy like South Africa in perpetuity? Because if we don't do it, we are on a powder keg of discontent, and understandably so.
Bruce, the numbers we are looking at, it's sleepless night stuff. In townships already, we were looking at numbers of 6 out of 10 people unemployed, and the youth number is higher than that. And these are young people who are also exposed to substance abuse, domestic violence. So there's all of this health and social stuff compounding on the unemployment. There's a mental despondency that is coming to the fore. So, powder keg is, if I can say it's an understatement. There's just so many layers of dysfunction that are happening in these communities. But I think this is also where the opportunity, and yes, the mask project is small, but look, we've had 4 weeks where we're doing it. But what we've seen in terms of the way we can look for these opportunities, what we've been able to bring into township communities, which literally have had their lifelines cut off with people who haven't been able to go to work. What we've been able to do in a short space of time is bring standards, consistency in production, scale in production, by creating a platform that acts as an aggregator for local production. Now, by doing this aggregation job and maintaining the consistency and standard, we're able to take all the small players and open them up to big market. So we've got this export order to Belgium, to the EU. It's an ex-BASF guy that's worked in South Africa before, who said, I want to support those township entrepreneurs. I'm going to buy masks from South Africa to take to the EU. And guess what? With 19 to the rand, these high quality masks cost me very little, and I can do my bit. So the marketing spin on this, there's a global need to buy sustainably. There's a global need to support the underdog. We can play into this along with our exchange rate and find more of these opportunities. But the big things we need to do is build those sorts of platforms to give these smaller guys access to market. We are not going to see these jobs happening in the current Santon private sector. They're not going to generate it. It has to be big, strategic, national platform creation projects and policy changes to drive those jobs.
Absolutely, Tashmia. I mean, as we wrap up this evening, just thoughts on the future for the Yes campaign. I mean, it took a year to get going. You then had a good year and a bit of operations, and now suddenly this is no doubt a body blow as well. You're not going to get anywhere near to the million. Do you feel like your wings have been permanently clipped, or is this merely a detour on the way to trying to solve this crisis of youth unemployment?
I don't think Yes is any different to any other business out there that has been hit by COVID. We've all been affected in some way. But we have seen examples of businesses that have really found opportunities in this. The masks project that you're seeing, which has now put about R1 million back in 4 or 5 weeks, R1 million back into township communities, isn't something to be sniffed at. So the idea is, can we create a lot more of these? We've got an e-commerce project going on. We've got one in potentially in Sebokeng that's coming up. So there are a whole lot of projects with SOEs, with municipalities, with conglomerates, with groups of companies, where we're coming together to build mega projects. So, there's the Yes Central, which is the BE level up, and you help us employ young people. But there are a whole lot of other ways in which the BE scorecard on enterprise and supplier development can be leveraged on mega projects. And those are some of the things we're working on now. How do we drive through partnership with government the 1,000 jobs and the 2,000 job projects? So absolutely, everybody's wings being clipped, but the idea is, how do you learn to run in a different direction?
Tashmia Ismail-Saville, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening on Taking Stock. We'll let you get back to work. Coming up in a moment, we're going to talk to the Solidarity Fund. They're not just buying personal protective equipment for doctors and nurses, they're also working on the jobs problem. In a moment. On to the chief executive now of the Solidarity Fund. Nomkhita Nqweni decided that she was going to have some time off after spending time in banking and was taking life easy until she got the call to national service. The chief executive of the Solidarity Fund now, which was initially funded by R1 billion from Johan Rupert, but it has also managed to attract millions more from ordinary South Africans who, seeking to make a contribution to the national repair job that is so desperately needed, have made donations. How's it going so far, Nomkhita?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Bruce, and having the opportunity to talk about the Solidarity Fund. As you know, the Solidarity Fund was an initiative that was actually launched by the president. Can you believe it? Just about 2 months ago. It feels much longer, obviously, given the scale of the challenges we're dealing with, but it was just 2 months ago, where the president obviously pledged the support of government, and it is an initiative that was a partnership between both government and business in the umbrella of business for South Africa. And it's gone very well in the context of the generosity of South Africans. We've certainly seen in a very short space of time South Africans coming to the fore in what I call unity in action, because we've been able to raise 2.8 billion in terms of pledges and converted 2.5 into cash in the bank, obviously, as we convert the pledges into funds. And this has come from a wide array of South Africans, from corporates to foundations, but also most importantly for me, more than 175,000 individual South Africans who through, whether you're swiping your credit card at the checkout counter at ShopRite, you give, just a little bit more. So it's gone well in that regard, but also not just in the generosity of South Africans, but the work that we've been able to do. We've deployed about 1.2 billion already of those funds into various initiatives, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly.
Give me a sense, please, because we know about the PPE stuff, and you're able to move quickly and nimbly. And if there is a need for PPE in a hospital in Nomkhita, for example, you can get the PPE there quickly, more quickly than perhaps the health department can because of bureaucracy and other constraints. But talk to me about jobs. Tonight is the focus all about jobs and the jobs crisis. We had the crisis before we went into this lockdown, and this crisis is being exacerbated on a daily basis. What sort of impact can this fund have?
Well, firstly, we'd most likely like to think that we've had an impact in protecting, South Africans more than being a creator of jobs per se. And as you've spoken about it, a big part of our resources were deployed into PPE. In the initial phases, I think that with a global scramble, effectively, to ensure that we all acquire PPE. I think we saw a lot of our procurement actually happening offshore. In the context of jobs, we are starting to see the activation of local manufacturing, which is great because it's something that will stand us in good stead. I'm becoming an expert in health now, in addition to financial services. But before we hit, the pandemic and COVID, I understand that 92% of all of our medical supplies, including PPE, were actually imported. And we could only kind of produce 8% as South Africa. So I think part of the work that we're trying to do as a fund is to be a catalyst, to be a game-changing catalyst in the context of activating a local manufacturing in some way. Obviously, our resources at 2.8 billion are much smaller than, let's call it a budget by government of 1.9 trillion. But in our own way, we are hoping to be a catalyst for local manufacturing, and certainly we're starting to procure a lot more from local suppliers who are manufacturing locally, and that can only stand us in good stead. Also, in terms of innovation, we've been a catalyst for innovation. Part of the initiatives that we funded is the activation of a prototype of a CPAP ventilators here in South Africa. So we're hoping that the work that we do will have a game-changing, long-lasting legacy, and also hopefully create more jobs.
I mean, it's this whole idea of deglobalization and the idea that global supply chains, which when everything is working fine, are great because you get things nice and cheaply from the cheapest place in the world to make it, and that's fine until it all goes wrong. Until it all goes wrong. And you have a crisis, and this crisis has exposed big shortcomings in that system. Is this then the opportunity that South Africa can grasp? I mean, from a perspective of the Denel-led initiative, which you supported in terms of creating ventilators, to clothing manufacturers who don't need to make ball gowns for the next while because nobody's going to balls, so they can make PPE equipment. I mean, all of this sort of stuff is, if used properly, an opportunity and a catalyst for future growth.
Absolutely, Bruce. I mean, there is an old adage and saying, right, don't waste a crisis. And I think that for us as South Africa, this is going to be that seminal moment in ensuring that we utilize the very tough time, that we've had through COVID to really take stock about how do we make sure that we remove, some of the red tape and things that, hinder us in being able to do things. I've been marveling at the fact that the fund has been in existence for 2 months, and yet we've been able to do so much. And it's in partnership, with civil society coalitions, with government, with everybody. And what I have certainly seen from my vantage point is that execution at pace is possible. And so we really need, to take heed of the lessons that we've learned and institutionalize them, because it should not just be in response to the crisis that we're facing now with COVID.
It is astonishing how South Africans do pull together at times of crisis and
absolutely.
Back from the brink, but it's exhausting to be operating in crisis mode all the time. And it is those lessons. I mean, do these things stick around after the crisis is over? Do the collaboration stick around? Does the cooperation, does the grown-up approach to mutually solving crisis problems in South Africa, because we've always got big problems to solve, does that survive the crisis? Because surely it should.
I'm certainly hoping that it does survive the crisis, Bruce. If anything, what we've seen is that it is possible. We've seen all South Africans, for example, contribute, to the efforts of the fund, irrespective of creed, color, etc. We've seen political parties, supporting the fund, because, they are also South Africans at the core. So if there's one thing that it has shown me, which is an example and an inspiration, is that it is possible. We can actually get over ourselves a little bit. And I'm hoping that, and maybe I'm an eternal optimist, I do hope that it is something that we can harness, because it is possible. We've shown it. Now let's make it part of our DNA.
Nomkhita Nqweni, thank you very much indeed. She's Chief Executive of the Solidarity Fund. In a moment, the good, the bad and the ugly of the crisis. Kevin Lings, who is Chief Economist at Stanlib, joins us to take us through some of the ugly data points, but also find out whether or not there are any opportunities that we might be missing. In a moment. And on to the final part of Taking Stock this evening here on ENCA. Kevin Lings is the Chief Economist at Stanlib. We've seen the jobs numbers out this week, Kevin, but they don't incorporate what is happening in the COVID economy, anecdotally at least. And so from the data points that you're looking at, just how bad is the real world scenario for jobs in South Africa right now?
Going into the COVID lockdown, the economy was under pressure. So understandably, we were already losing jobs, and obviously the unemployment rate was moving up. And now with the COVID lockdown, when we get those numbers, I am expecting to see a significant jump in the unemployment rate. So we are forecasting that over a period of a year, which is from the second quarter of this year to the second quarter of next year, we're expecting 2.1 million job losses. Obviously, in the interim, you can actually have more job losses as companies simply close down, etc. And then as you are opening up the economy, then you would hopefully hire many of those people back, or simply take many of those people back on. But I'm looking at a net reduction over a period of a year of 2.1 million jobs. That would push the unemployment rate up, the official unemployment rate up to 35%, obviously the highest we've had. That excludes, importantly, the discouraged workers. And I am expecting to see a big increase in discouraged workers, which are simply people who have given up looking for work. So there you would add another couple of million people to that. And so the official unemployment rate is then going to quite comfortably approach 40%. And then if you break that down into the youth, at the moment, youth unemployment rate sits at around about the 60% level. Obviously, if you add back, that includes adding back the discouraged youth, then you get the number going up substantially more than that. So what we've got here is a significant ramp up in unemployment, no matter how you calculate the number, that South Africa is going to have, by world standards, an incredibly high unemployment rate. Remember, at the height of the Great Depression in the UK, the unemployment rate got to 31%. We are on our way comfortably to 35%. And I think the critical number here is if we want to make a difference to the employment environment, South Africa needs to create a minimum of 600,000 jobs a year, because every year 600,000 new people net enter the labor market. So obviously people retire, people die, people leave school and university and go into the labor market. The net effect is 600,000. So we've got to be asking ourselves, how are we going to create a minimum of 600,000 jobs every year? And when we create 600,000, we're only going to keep the unemployment rate at the current level. That's the challenge ahead. So the numbers are very, very scary.
I mean, it's a terrifying number. I mean, I don't even know if we were creating 600,000 jobs a year in our peak growth phase between, say, 2001 and 2007, when we did create several million jobs over that period of time. But, I mean, just considering the environment in which we're in and an economic contraction this year of as much as 10, 11% for the economy, it's natural that we will cut jobs. The problem with many of the jobs that are being cut right now is that many of the people who have been cut will never go back to work again. They become permanently unemployed. They become part of that pool of discouraged work seekers. And it takes something of a miracle, or is there a science to restore our fortunes?
So that's exactly what happens. There's a lot of research internationally to show that the longer you stay unemployed, the much more difficult it is for you to re-enter the labor market. Part of that has to do with the loss of skills. Also, importantly, a loss of networking and that ability to network and get back into the labor market. And clearly in South Africa, we do already have a huge number of unskilled people who are unemployed. So a lot of the people who are losing jobs are going to be at the lower income level, less skilled, etc., which then makes it even more challenging for those individuals to gain employment. And it's entirely feasible that our long-term unemployment rate ratchets up on an ongoing basis. So I don't think even if we get to, say, 2 or 3% growth, that we're suddenly going to find that we hire all those people back. The reason is that I think many companies are going to be reassessing how they operate. Do they need as many people? They're learning a lot of lessons about the business environment, how to do things better. They're learning that online actually works. They're learning that remote working works, etc. And I think the net result of that is going to be less people in businesses, which all of that means that South Africa needs to focus heavily on how do we create new business? Where do we get new investment from? Be that small business, medium-sized business, or we try and expand or some sort of large business, but where do we get new opportunities from? And I don't think we're paying that anywhere near enough attention.
I think we're so busy putting out fires at the moment in the height of COVID and watching for this peak, and we're dealing with the health consequences and we're trying to control that nobody is truly focusing on after COVID, what happens after this crisis, because that's when the humanitarian crisis really takes hold, and that's when despondency takes hold, and that's when people lose hope. And losing hope in an economy is one of its most devastating, decaying factors, I'm sure.
Yes, so the social tension we can already see out there. We can see it in various social protests. And obviously the risk is that as we open up and the lockdown eases back, that those numbers of unemployed remain incredibly high and that the social environment deteriorates further. And that can easily spill over into social unrest or social protest. It also, very importantly from our perspective, adds a lot of pressure onto government in terms of paying of social payments, social grants. So we know that, yes, not every single person who is unemployed gets a social grant, but as you add more people to the unemployment world, then you are obviously adding to the social grant pressure, and government's going to be under a lot of pressure to extend some of these payments because I don't think jobs are going to flood back. We know government finances is under difficulty. At the same time, government's going to be looking to how do we re-energize this economy. Government's talking about infrastructure, go back to the RDP as a type initiative. How is that all going to be funded? So I think this pressure is going to ratchet up because we're trying to do all of this from a point of financial weakness. I think the way forward is more to try and get the private business and government to work much more closely together, leverage the private sector balance sheet, get projects done bit by bit. Don't try and eat the elephant all in one bite. and maybe just pick certain areas and see if we can't partner with the private sector and try and get some projects going to build confidence.
It looks like that's the only solution, is the future of public-private partnerships. So much has been learned, as Nomkhita was telling us earlier, through the collaboration that has happened, extraordinary collaboration that has happened between public and private sectors through this crisis. That is the one thing that we've got to take out of this crisis to build upon. Kevin Lings, Chief Economist at Stanlib, thank you. It's a sobering taking stock this evening. It's a grim outlook for the economy, certainly a very, very grim outlook for individuals in South Africa who are losing jobs, many of whom are not going to be able to get those back again. My thanks to my guests this evening, to Tashmia Ismail-Saville, Chief Executive of the Youth Employment Service, to Nomkhita Nqweni, who is Chief Executive of the Solidarity Fund and the Chief Economist at Stanlib, Kevin Lings. To you for watching, thank you very much for joining us. Till next time, bye-bye.